All right. Good morning, everybody. So today is Daf Ayin Daled Maseches Pesachim, the first daf of the seventh parak. Good news is nothing like we were discussing yesterday or before. It starts off easier. Well, I can't promise tomorrow, but today seems a little bit easier, less kachim involved. So let's see. Zuk the Mishnah, my parak. As we make our way through Shas, Ketzad Tzolinas Pesach. How does one go about roasting his Karban Pesach? So Mevin Shiput Sharimon. So you go ahead and you take basically a stick or a stake, right, from a pomegranate wood. The Teichpiv, and it says basically you take the thinner end and you put it through the mouth, right, of the animal, right? Until it goes all the way out to the other end. All right, so you put that through, and then you put the narrower end into the mouth, and therefore the wider end ends up by the mouth, and then you basically hang it with the mouth open, so it's hanging downward. So, and you will soon see anything blood or anything that would drip out, and it'll be over the fire, and also it won't slide into the fire because it's a little wider at the bottom. And says Rabbi Yosef Glili, you go ahead and you take the innards and the stuff from the inside and then the intestines, and you put it on the inside of the animal, right? So you sort of put it on the inside of the animal, right? You basically undo it and then put it back on the inside, and therefore you roast it that way. However, Rabbi Kiva Eimer, Kamin Bishul is that, right? No, you don't go ahead and take the innards and put it inside the animal, because that's sort of like you put innards inside a pot that sort of cooks in there, as opposed to roasts. Rather, you tie it around the outside and then you go ahead and roast it that way. And and you don't go ahead and you don't go ahead and roast it on a metal spit and not on a grill. And we'll soon see, and we'll go explain why. And Amar Rabbi Tzadok, Ma'aser Rabbi Gamliel, Shamar Letevi Avdei, once said to his Tevi, his servant, go ahead and roast it on a grill. So we have to see what's going on there. Obviously, I'm sure the Gemara will say Maisa Listor, right? You say halacha, and then you bring a Maisa that contradicts the halacha. So we'll have to see in that case. So let's see. Zak the Gemara. I understand. Why do you have to go ahead and take a wooden or from pomegranate wood? We'll describe exactly why from there. But why can't you go ahead and use a metallic spit? So the Gemara answers, once part of it gets hot, right? Metal is a conductor, a very good conductor, and therefore once part of it gets hot, it all gets hot, and therefore a lot of it is now roasting, not from the fire, but rather it's roasting or cooking up from the heat of the metal. And the Torah says you have to go ahead and roast it from the fire, to be roasted from the fire, and not roast it from something else, i.e., heated metal. Why don't you go ahead and use palm tree? So I do these shivi mapik maya fahavi kamavusha, right? Since there's little grooves in it, little cuts in there, and there is liquid moisture inside, then moisture cooks up, and therefore it's similar to bishul. It's not to cooking, right? With boiling water versus roasting. So what about go ahead and you bring fig wood? So I did the machachal mapik maya. Once again, it's also it's hollow on the inside, it's machal, and therefore there's water in it. So once again, similar to bishul. Alone, shel charuv, shel sikma, right? What about from oak or a sycamore or carob wood? Right? Why don't you use any of those woods? So when it says I did these by kitre mapik maya, since over there they have knots, and in the knots, sort of, in the wood, then there's moisture in there. And once again, the moisture will go ahead and cook it. I shall rimonami. So aren't also these knots in the pomegranate wood? So when it says, no, shira kitre, those are smooth, and therefore, there's not too much moisture in there. Or maybe it's a young tree that they're using from the pomegranate wood, which does not have these knots. But what about the area where you cut it off? Isn't there moisture from there that will come out? So our answer is the mapik lebe paske lebar, right? Rather, the end they basically cut off, right? The wide end, it will be face down right? When it's over the fire. So therefore, since it's face down in the fire, any moisture in there will not, cook up the animal. Rather, will go down into the fire. And says our Gemara, Mas Nisan, the like Rabbi Yehuda, it's not like Rabbi Yehuda, the tiny Rabbi Yehuda, Aimer, Kashem Shesh, she put shel eitz ein nisrav, kach she put shematechas ein matiach. Just like the wood doesn't go ahead and burn, so too the metal doesn't go ahead and heat up, and therefore metal wouldn't be a problem according to Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Zeh chamitzasa chamkula v'zeh chamitzasa ein chamkula. Says no. Science says differently. When you have wood, if part of it becomes hot, the rest of it doesn't necessarily, become too hot. However, when it comes to when it comes to metals, if part of it becomes hot, then the rest of it becomes hot, and therefore we would disagree. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with our Mishnah because he says, I guess the heat that the metal gets, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is okay, but our Mishnah says no, it gets too hot, and therefore it's now cooking or roasting from the metal and not roasting from the fire. Fine, 2 dots. The nice in Eskarav, and then you go ahead and you put the innards on the outside of the animal. So Taylor Lunar Bryce Rabbi Shmuel Karo Teich Teich, right? He calls it Teich Teich, right? We've seen this actually concept before. Teich Teich is like the sound of boiling, right? When things are cooking, it's like the Teich Teich when you mix it around, but also Teich means inside. And as he holds, you take the insides of the animal and you put it inside the animal, which is Teich, right, within, right? So therefore Teich Teich is basically the sound it makes. And Rabbi Tarfon, Kare Gedi Mikulas, right? However, Rabbi Tarfon, right, he basically on the outside, he would basically be the helmet, right? The innards would be the helmet to the Karban Pesach because it would go on the outside, not the inside. And Taner Rabbanan Eza Gedi Mikulas, the Yaslecha Pesach Bisman. What is considered this a Gedi, a kid? Right, a young goat that's considered mikulas, that is helmeted, right? Bisman is zet during the Pesach at us to go ahead and prayer. Kol shetzol kulo kechad. If you go ahead and you roast it all together, nechtach with aver nishlak mimena aver ein zegedi mikulas. However, if you go ahead and cut off one of its limbs, or you roast, right, nishlak, right, you boil it, right, one of its limbs, then it's not considered to be mikulas. Then it's not identical to the way that the Karban Pesach was prepared, and therefore it was okay. So as long as you go ahead and you cut off one of its limbs, or you boil one of its limbs, then the entire then it will be permitted to go ahead and prepare it that way, even though you're roasting the rest of it. I understand you say that if you cut off a piece, let's say the leg of the animal, right, and then you roast it all together. So since it's cut off, even though you're roasting everything, it's okay. So why would you possibly need to teach me that if you cut off one of the legs and you boil it, right, that is also mutter, right? Obviously, if you roast them all, but at least one is cut off, it's mutter. So why do you need to tell me something which is boiled? Some Rav Shei says shalkol mechuber. No, even that if you boil one of the legs while it's still attached to the animal, you roast the rest, that is still considered to be enough of a shino, enough of a change that is not usher to do. And Omar Rabba Hai Mulyasa Shari. Mulyasa. So you go ahead and you take you have the basically raw meat and you stuff it inside the animal. So now it's going to be a shaila of blood, right? You know, the part of the animals, right, contain blood. One is forbidden to eat blood. So the question is, so mulyasa, to go ahead and have the raw meat inside the animal while you roast it is mutter, right? Because we said you put it inside and then you roast it that way. I isn't absorbing the blood. So there's a concept we're going to be discussing. Right? Just like it absorbs the blood, so too it discharges the blood. So there was blood in, blood out, and therefore it would be mutter. So name of Messiah, let's say we have a proof. You go ahead, you put the innards on the inside of the animal, and you roast them. My time, what's the reason? Because by the same way the meat would absorb it, so too it discharges it. Somebody say, no, Shani Hasam, Kevan Dika, Beza Shchita, Mechalchel, Midav Daiv. So you say, no, that since over there, that the opening, but the Beza Shchita, right, the mouth, maybe doesn't absorb and put up, but since maybe it drips out and it's hanging down, right, so therefore any blood that was inside the raw meat on the inside will go out, will not be absorbed into the meat of the animal. Right, because remember, you're not eating that raw meat, and you're not eating the intestines, right? You're talking about the meat. So the question is the blood going from the raw meat or from the innards, right, into the meat itself and staying there? So I name Messiah. Okay, let's say another of Halev Kara Umaitzias Damo. When it comes to eating the heart, right, or the heart, right? So you can go ahead, you cut it open, and then you take out its blood. And loy cut, if you didn't cut it le'achar bishul mutter. You can even go ahead and cut it open after you cook it and it's mutter. So my time, what's the reason? Right? So why do we say that it's okay? We say, okay, the same way that it expelled the blood, so too, it absorbed it, so too, it expelled it, it discharged it. So Ryan says, no, shani leiv the shai. No, since the heart is smooth, and therefore it doesn't necessarily absorb any of the blood, and therefore that's the reason why it would be mutter. I Ravin Saba, the elder Ravin Tavle Ai bar Gozola Larav. So he used to go ahead and have like a little, I don't know, schnitzel, right? Some sort of breaded geisel, right? Breaded dove, right? Or bird, right? And V'amarle, imali tfili havli veichel. He says, if it's good, I'll eat it. In other words, there is no issue. He wasn't concerned about the blood from the bird basically being absorbed into the flour, all right, of the breaded bird, right? So Goran says, so what do you see over there? So you see that maybe it's because that just the same way it absorbs it, right, so too it discharges it. So ha'i b'smido, that's from a very fine flour, de mapir, which I guess crumbles and allows the blood to go through, and therefore it doesn't absorb any of the blood from the bird. So one time they did the same thing. They went ahead and they, I guess, fried with the flour goose. And Omar Eloy the Chazise the Zig Kazuza Chiavar lo yachli minei. If I don't see it, looks clear, looks completely white, I'm not going to go ahead and eat it. Okay. Why? Because it's completely white and there's no blood. And if you would think that whatever it would absorb, it would go ahead and discharge it. Why does he need to go ahead and to be clear? Even if it's not clear, right? If it's not red, but even if it's not clear as white, shouldn't it be good? Because whatever it absorbed, it dispelled, right? It came out. So where the answer is now, hasa b'chirata d'sharim. Over there was talking about, right, thick flour, which wasn't so, which wasn't like the fine flour, and therefore perhaps it wouldn't, if it did absorb any blood, it wouldn't have allowed it to get out, and therefore he wanted it to be very clear, so there was no blood. And speaking of which, behilchasa, the smida with the very fine flour, the one that's very loose and allows the blood to go in, blood to go out. Ben asmig, ben loy asmig sharia. Whether it's red or not, it's mutter, right? Because it goes out. Di chiyarta, if it's made of white flour, regular flour, easy kazuze charata sharia. Since that's thicker, if it's white, then it's mutter, ilo. But if not, then aser. And the shar kamachim. But I guess the other types of flour, which is in the middle, asmik aser lo asmik shari. If it is red, then it's aser. We assume that there's some blood in there in that flour, and if not, then it's mutter. So hi mulyasa. What about the case of mulyasa? Earlier we said the animal stuffed with the raw meat. So man de aser afilu puma letachat. The one who says it's aser, even if it's facing downwards, it's aser. Uman de shari. The one who says that's mutter afilu puma le'el. Even if the mouth is up, it does it because it doesn't absorb it. And even if it did absorb, whatever it absorbed, it discharges. The hilchasa mulyasa shari afilu puma le'el. The halacha is like the makel opinion that says even if the opening, the animal is not face down, right, when it's roasting, but if it's face up, then we say that it is mutter because even if it did absorb, it would also discharge the blood. Now, three cases. Umtza, beye, umizrike. Right? Umtza is a raw meat. Beye are considered to be, or not considered, is the testicles, right, of the animal, and umizraki. And also the mizraki are also part of artery in the, we'll soon see the neck of the animal. So these are basically three pieces of meat that are identified to having more than the usual type of blood, right? There's blood in those three cases. So pligiba, Rav Acha, Ravina. This is identical machlokes in all three of these pieces between Rav Acha and Ravina. Now, b'chol Torah kula, Rav Acha l'chumra v'Ravina l'chula. Normally, when they to argue between Rav Acha and Ravina, Rav Acha is machmer, and Ravina is l'kula. V'hilchas like Ravina l'kula, and halacha is like Ravina, who's l'kula. However, labar mehani class, except for three cases, the ravacha lekula v'ravina l'chumra v'hilchos ravacha lekula. Except for these three cases, which ravacha is the makel one, and ravina is mach. When we go like ravacha lekula, so all the cases we go lekula, just these three. It's not ravina is being makel, but it's ravacha being makel, and the halacha is like ravacha being makel. And what are these cases? So let's go one at a time. Almost identical machlokes. So hi umtza the asmik, when you have a piece of raw meat, right, that turned red. So if you look at the shari, if you go ahead, you cut it and you salt it, you can even cook it in a pot. Because remember, you put it in a pot, right? Whatever comes out, right, really gets absorbed by everything else in the pot, right? It's different than over a fire or on coals, as we'll soon see, right? So if you cut it and you salt it, it's mutter to cook it even in a pot. So shafte v'shipura. If you go ahead and you put it on the spit, then shari mida daif, because then the any blood that comes out of it will basically flow down into the fire and not into the meat. And achte agumare. Now, if you put it on hot coals, right? If you put it on coals, not like the fire, but if you put it on the coals where it sort of sits there, right, from the intense heat, right, of the coals, then pligaba Rav Achav Ravina. This is Machlokes Rav Achav Ravina. Chad aser v'chad shari. So he said one, right, is aser l'chayr. That would be Ravina, because he said he was l'chum in these cases, and the other one said shari. Man di aser. The other one says mutter, right? Man di aser matzmis tzamis. The one who says it's aser. Why? Because when you go ahead and roast it on coals, it shrivels up and the blood is contained, and therefore the blood doesn't come out. Therefore, it's aser. Man the shari mishav shayv. And the one who says mutter is because the blood still, even when it comes to a coals, it also flows out. And the hilchasa mishav shayv. The halach is that the heat from the coals pulls out, extracts the blood, and therefore it's mutter. V'chein beit. And so too, when it comes to beit, when it comes to the testicles, right? Chaschinu or malchinu afilu kadeir shari. Right? You want to go ahead and you cut it open and you salt it, and then it's mutter even to go ahead and cook it in a pot, because he said all the blood is out. And talina b'shipu the shari. If you go ahead and you put it on a spit, then it's mutter midav daif, because we say that the blood flows out. And however, achtine agumrei, once again, if you go ahead and roast it on coals, such a case, once again, pligiba Rav Achav Ravina. Machlokes between Rav Achav Ravina, chad asar v'chad shari. The one says asar, one's mutter. Man di asar mitzmis tzamis. The one who says it's asar. Why? Because it shrivels up and it contains the blood in the bait, right? However, man di shari, the one who says it's mutter. Why is that mishav shari? Because it goes ahead and the coals basically draw out the blood from the meat. And so too, these other types of arteries and veins in the neck. If you go ahead and you cut it and you salt it, even if you put it in a pot, it's mutter, right? Because it drew out the blood prior to it being inside the pot. And tali b'shipuda, if you go ahead and you put it on roasted on a spit, then base ashchita l'tasai shari. If the open end, the area where you shechted by the neck is facing down, then it's mutter midev daif, because it drips out. And achte agmur. But however, if it is if it face down, then it's mutter, because the blood comes out. And achte, and you go ahead agmur. If you go ahead and you heat it up on coals, then pligi so pligi Rav Achav Ravina. Machlokes Rav Achav Ravina. Chad aser v'chad shari. One says aser, one's mutter. Right? The one who says it's aser is because it absorbs it. Man the shari mishav shayv, because the blood drips out. The hilchasa and the halach is mishav shayv. The halach is that it does drip out on coals, and therefore it would be mutter. So all these cases, three cases where we go lekula, not lechuma. Hi umsa the asmik. Right? What about meat? Right? We have this piece of meat that asmik, it turned red. Chayle aser. So the chaldia, right? The gravy from it, right? When you cut it, there's a little gravy that comes out. The chaimitz, it's almost like a vinegar. That which comes out is aser, because they're contained in this, right? In the red gravy is blood. And lo asmik. However, if it's not red, chale shari, then it is mutter. Right? If it's not red, then any gravy that comes from it is mutter. And Ravina Omar afilo asmik nami chali aser. Even if it doesn't turn red, the gravy is also aser. Why? Yefsha delesbe shirakidama. It's impossible for not to be some blood inside this gravy of the piece of meat. And Amarle Mar Bar Ameimar Ravashi says, Mar Bar Ameimar Ravashi, Abba Migmele Agmuye. All right, so he said, my father used to go ahead and basically swallow this gravy, and some say Rav Ashi Gufe Migmal Legmi. Some say Rav Ashi he himself went ahead and had the gravy. He thought it was he paskin it was mutter. So Amar Le Mar Baramei Rav Ashi says to Mar Baramei, says Rav Ashi. So Abba, Hi Chala de Chala Bechadzimna Tu Loitani Chalitabe. So any sort of vinegar they used to go ahead and soak the meat in, if it was used once, it would lose its potency, and they would not go ahead and use it again to basically draw out, to soak out the blood. So so why is the vinegar that was used once different? Any different than the vinegar that's used, for the first time? So our answer is Hasam Ise Likua de Pere. Well, in the first case, there is some potency in the pere, right, in the fruit juice or whatever of the vinegar, right? That draws out the blood. However, once it's used to soak it, then hachalesa the cure the pere bena. But once it's used for a second time, then it doesn't have that potency to go ahead and draw out the blood, and therefore this vinegar basically would not be effective in taking out the blood. All right, we'll stop here at the 2 dots. All right, shkoyach, and once again, a big mazel tov to our specialist, Randy.
Mazel tov, Randy.
Mazel tov, Randy.
Wonderful day, shkoyach.
Where's the big party?
Everywhere.
Randy, just tell us
You
where.
never stop partying.